Jake Martinez checked his watch as he locked the back door of the animal clinic. 8:30 in the evening, just like every other night. The small Colorado town was quiet now, with most people already home watching television or getting ready for bed. But Jake's day wasn't quite finished yet. He walked to his old pickup truck and pulled out a large bag of dog food and a smaller bag of cat treats. The street light flickered above him as he made his way to the alley behind the clinic. This had been his routine for 2 years now, ever since he started working as a veterinary technician at Dr. Kane's clinic. The alley wasn't much to look at. Concrete walls, a few dumpsters, and weeds growing through cracks in the pavement. But, to Jake, it was important. This was where the forgotten animals came to find food and shelter, stray cats, abandoned dogs, and sometimes wild animals that wandered down from the mountains. Jake opened the bag of dog food and poured it into 3 metal bowls he kept hidden behind the largest dumpster. The sound of kibble hitting metal echoed off the walls. Almost immediately he heard rustling from the shadows. Yellow eyes gleamed in the darkness, watching him carefully. "Come on, guys," Jake said softly. "I know you're hungry." A skinny orange cat was the first to approach. Jake had been feeding this one for months and had named him Rusty. The cat's fur was matted and dirty, but his eyes were bright and alert. Behind Rusty came 2 more cats and a small brown dog with only 3 legs. Jake smiled as he watched them eat. His co-workers thought he was crazy for spending his own money on food for strays. Dr. Kane had told him more than once that he was too soft-hearted for his own good, but Jake couldn't help it. He had grown up poor, often going to bed hungry himself. He knew what it felt like to be forgotten and left behind. As the animals ate, Jake filled a large bowl with fresh water from a hose connected to the clinic. The autumn air was getting colder, and he worried about the animals surviving the winter. He had been thinking about building some kind of shelter for them, but he would need permission from Dr. Kane first. Jake was putting the empty food bags back in his truck when he noticed something strange. Through the trees at the end of the alley, he could see a blue light glowing in the woods. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. Jake had lived in this town his whole life and had never seen anything like it. He walked closer to the tree line, trying to get a better look. The light seemed to be coming from deep in the forest, maybe half a mile away. It was too steady to be a campfire, and too blue to be any kind of normal light. Jake thought it might be teenagers with some kind of LED flashlight playing games in the woods. The 3-legged dog limped over to Jake and sat beside him, also looking toward the strange light. The dog whined softly as if he could sense something that Jake couldn't. "What do you think, buddy?" Jake asked, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Should we go check it out?" But as Jake considered walking into the woods, the blue light suddenly went out. The forest returned to normal darkness, with only the moon providing light through the clouds. Jake waited for several minutes, but the light didn't come back. "Probably just kids," he said to Buddy. But something about the light bothered him. It had seemed too large and too bright to be a flashlight. Jake finished his routine by checking on a cardboard box he had set up as a shelter for the smaller animals. Inside, he found a mother cat with 3 tiny kittens. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. The mother cat looked up at Jake with tired eyes, and he could tell she was grateful for the warm, dry place to keep her babies safe. "Don't worry, girl," Jake whispered. "I'll take care of you." He made a mental note to bring some special kitten food tomorrow, along with a blanket to make the box more comfortable. He also decided he would talk to Dr. Kane about the mother cat and her kittens. Maybe they could find homes for them. As Jake walked back to his truck, he heard the animals settling down for the night. Some would sleep in the cardboard shelters he had made. Others would find warm spots near the clinic's heating vents. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Jake had been an animal lover his entire life. As a child, he was always bringing home injured birds or lost puppies, much to his mother's dismay. She used to joke that their house was like a zoo because of all the animals Jake rescued. When he graduated from high school, there was no question about what he wanted to do with his life. Working with animals was the only career that made sense to him. The drive home took only 10 minutes through the quiet streets of his hometown. Jake lived in a small apartment above the hardware store just a few blocks from the clinic. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough for him. He had a bed, a kitchen, and most importantly, he was close enough to the clinic to check on the animals, whenever he needed to. That night, as Jake got ready for bed, he found himself thinking about the blue light in the woods. He stood at his bedroom window, looking out toward the forest, but everything was dark and normal. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about tonight. Over the next few days, Jake continued his evening routine as usual. He fed the animals, checked on the mother cat and her kittens, and made sure everyone had fresh water. But each night, he also looked for the strange blue light. Sometimes he thought he saw a faint glow through the trees, but it was never as bright or obvious as that first night. What Jake didn't notice was that his routine was being watched. Hidden in the shadows of the forest, 3 pairs of large, unusual eyes observed his every move. They watched him feed the animals with careful attention. They saw his gentle way with the frightened strays, and they began to understand that this human was different from the others they had observed. The watchers were hungry too, but they were too afraid to approach. They had been hiding in the woods for weeks, surviving on berries and stream water, but the smell of the food Jake brought each night was becoming harder and harder to resist. 3 weeks had passed since Jake first saw the blue light in the woods. His evening routine had become even more important to him because he noticed the food was disappearing faster than usual. Not just the dog and cat food, but also the water. Bowls were being emptied completely every night. Jake thought maybe more animals had found his feeding spot. He started bringing larger amounts of food and even added some leftover sandwiches from his lunch. Whatever was eating the extra food seemed to be very hungry. On a particularly cold Thursday evening, Jake was arranging the food bowls when he heard a sound that made him freeze. It wasn't the usual rustling of cats or the soft padding of dog. Pause. This sounded like voices, but not quite human voices. The sounds were musical, like birds singing, but with a pattern that seemed like conversation. Jake stood very still and listened. The sounds were coming from behind the large dumpster where he kept the food bowls. Slowly, quietly, he walked around the side of the dumpster to see what was making the noise. What he saw made him gasp out loud. 3 figures were crouched near the food bowls, eating the kibble with their hands. At first glance, they looked like teenage girls, but Jake could immediately tell they were not human. Their skin had a pale blue tint that seemed to glow slightly in the moonlight. Their eyes were much larger than human eyes and reflected light, like a cat's eyes do in the dark. The strangest thing was their ears, which were pointed and moved slightly as they listened to sounds around them. They wore clothes that looked like they were made of metal fabric, but the material was torn and dirty. All 3 of them looked extremely thin, like they hadn't eaten a proper meal in weeks. The moment they saw Jake, they stopped eating and froze, like deer caught in headlights. One of them made a high musical sound that Jake somehow understood was a warning to the others. In an instant, all 3 figures scrambled to their feet and ran toward the woods, moving faster than any human could run. Jake stood there for several minutes, trying to process what he had just seen. His first thought was that his eyes were playing tricks on him, but the evidence was right there. The food bowls were half empty, and he could see small footprints in the dirt that were definitely not made by animals. That night, Jake barely slept. He kept thinking about the 3 strange beings he had seen. They had looked scared and hungry, just like the stray animals he fed every night. Whatever they were clearly in need of help. The next evening, Jake brought twice as much food as usual. He also brought some bread, fruit, and bottled water. If these beings were intelligent enough to wear clothes, they might prefer human food to pet food. Jake set up the usual bowls for the animals, but he also arranged the human food on a clean towel near the dumpster. Then he did something he had never done before. Instead of leaving right away, he sat down on an old crate about 20 feet away and waited. For an hour, nothing happened except the usual stray animals coming to eat. Jake was about to give up when he heard the musical sounds again. This time he stayed perfectly still and didn't look directly toward the sounds. Very slowly, the 3 beings emerged from the shadows. They looked nervously at Jake but seemed to realize he wasn't going to chase them. The hunger was stronger than their fear. Jake watched from the corner of his eye as they approached the food he had left. They examined everything carefully before eating. When they tasted the bread, one of them made a sound that Jake thought might be happiness or relief. From his work with scared animals, Jake knew that sudden movements or direct eye contact could frighten them away. He sat very still and kept his gaze focused on the ground. Occasionally he spoke in a soft, calm voice, the same way he talked to frightened cats. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I won't hurt you. I just want to help." The beings stopped eating and listened to his voice. One of them, who seemed to be the leader, made a series of musical sounds. Jake had the strange feeling that she was trying to communicate with him. Over the next week, Jake established a new routine. Every evening, he would bring food for both the animals and the mysterious beings. He would sit on his crate and wait, speaking softly and moving slowly. Each night, the three beings became a little less afraid. Jake began to notice differences between them. One had longer hair and seemed to be the leader. She was the one who always checked the food first and made decisions for the group. The second one was smaller and moved more quietly than the others. The third one seemed to be injured, favoring her left arm and moving more slowly. By watching their behavior, Jake started to understand some of their musical language. High, quick sounds seemed to mean danger or fear. Lower, longer sounds appeared, to be calm or happy. When they were comfortable, they made gentle humming sounds while they ate. Jake also noticed that they were very clean, despite living in the woods. Their strange clothes, though torn, were always neat. They seemed to have some kind of technology because their clothes sometimes glowed faintly in the dark. On the 7th night of this new routine, something amazing happened. As Jake sat on his crate, the leader of the group approached him. She stopped about 10 feet away and pointed to herself. "Zara," she said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. Jake's heart raced with excitement. She was telling him her name. He pointed to himself and said, "Jake." Zara tilted her head and repeated, "Jake." The way she said it was musical and beautiful. She then pointed to her two companions. "Luna," she said, indicating the smaller one. "Nova," she said, pointing to the injured one. "Zara, Luna, Nova," Jake repeated, pointing to each of them. All three of them made happy humming sounds. Over the following nights, Jake learned more about his new friends. They understood much more English than they could speak. They seemed to recognize the names of different foods and could follow simple instructions. Jake discovered that they preferred fruits and vegetables to meat, though they would eat almost anything when they were very hungry. They were fascinated by things like chocolate and candy, but these foods seemed to make them sick. Most importantly, Jake realized that they needed more help than just food. Nova's injury was getting worse, and all three of them were showing signs of illness from living outdoors in the cold weather. Jake knew he had to do something more to help them, but he also knew that revealing their existence to other humans might put them in danger. He had seen enough movies to know that first contact with aliens usually didn't go well for the aliens. But as he watched Zara carefully tend to Nova's injured arm, using some kind of glowing device that seemed to ease the pain, Jake made a decision. These beings were not invaders or threats. They were refugees, lost and far from home, just like the stray animals he had been feeding for years. He was going to help them, whatever the risk. Jake's relationship with Zara, Luna, and Nova grew stronger each night. He had started bringing a notebook to their meetings, drawing simple pictures to communicate better. Through pictures and gestures, he learned that they came from a place, among the stars, pointing up at the night sky when they tried to explain. The breakthrough came when Jake drew a picture of their solar system. Zara became very excited and took the pencil from him. She drew a completely different arrangement of planets around a different star. Then she pointed to one small planet at the edge of her drawing and made sad musical sounds. "Home," she said, in English, touching the drawing. "Home gone." Jake's heart broke when he understood. Their world was dying or destroyed, and they were refugees in space. He drew a picture of Earth and pointed to the ground, then pointed to himself. "My home," he said. Then he pointed to all of them together and said, "Our home now." Zara's large eyes filled with something that looked like tears, though they sparkled blue instead of clear. She touched Jake's hand gently and said, "Thank you, Jake." Over the following weeks, Jake learned more about his alien friends. Zara was some kind of scientist who studied plants. She was fascinated by Earth's flowers and trees, often collecting leaves and seeds to examine with small, glowing devices she kept in her torn clothing. Luna studied animals and was amazed by Earth's wildlife. She could communicate with the stray cats and dogs in ways that Jake couldn't understand. The animals seemed to trust her immediately, and Jake often found her surrounded by grateful strays who sensed her gentle nature. Nova was their technology expert, but her injured arm made it difficult for her to work with the complex devices they had brought with them. Jake could see that she was frustrated and worried about something important. Through their developing communication, Jake learned that their ship had crashed in the woods several weeks ago. They had been hiding ever since, afraid to contact humans because they had seen military aircraft searching the crash site. Jake realized they needed medical attention, especially Nova. Her injury was clearly serious, and all three aliens showed signs of malnutrition and exposure. But taking them to a hospital would create too many questions and probably lead to government involvement. Instead, Jake decided to use his veterinary knowledge to help them. He started bringing medical supplies from the clinic, antibiotics, bandages, and nutritional supplements. He was careful to take only small amounts that wouldn't be missed. To his surprise, many of the treatments that worked on Earth animals also helped the aliens. Their biology was different but similar enough that basic medicine could help them. Jake cleaned and bandaged Nova's arm using techniques he had learned from treating injured dogs. The aliens were amazed by Jake's medical knowledge. They had expected humans to be primitive compared to their own technology, but Jake's understanding of healing impressed them. In return, they began to share some of their own knowledge with him. Zara showed Jake how their plants grew differently on their home world. She had seeds with her that could grow food in just a few days, and she taught Jake how to prepare them. The food was strange but nutritious, and it helped all of them stay healthier. Luna demonstrated her ability to communicate with animals. She taught Jake that many animals could sense things humans couldn't, like changes in weather or the presence of danger. The stray animals in the alley had actually been trying to warn Jake about the aliens' presence for weeks. Nova, despite her injury, was able to show Jake some of their technology. She had a small device that could purify water instantly, and another that could generate heat without fire. These tools had been keeping them alive in the wilderness. Jake was fascinated by everything they shared with him, but he was most impressed by their peaceful nature. Despite having technology far beyond anything on Earth, they had no weapons. Their culture seemed to be based on cooperation and care for other living things. As winter approached, Jake knew they needed better shelter. The cardboard boxes and makeshift covers he had built for the stray animals wouldn't be enough to keep the aliens safe through the cold months. Jake had an idea. Behind the animal clinic was an old storage shed that Dr. Kane never used. It was full of broken equipment and old files, but it had 4 walls and a roof. Jake started cleaning it out bit by bit, telling Dr. Kane that he wanted to organize the storage better. It took him 2 weeks to clear out the shed and make it habitable. He brought in old blankets, a small heater, and some basic furniture. He even managed to run an electrical cord from the clinic to provide power for a small lamp. When Jake showed the aliens their new shelter, they were overwhelmed with gratitude. Zara hugged him, which felt strange because her body temperature was much cooler than a human's. Luna and Nova both made beautiful musical sounds that Jake had learned meant happiness and thanks. The shed became their secret base. Jake visited them every evening after work, bringing food, medical supplies, and materials to help them repair their ship. Nova had explained that their ship was badly damaged but might be repairable if they could find the right materials. Jake started borrowing electronic components from old equipment at the clinic. He also visited junkyards and electronics stores, buying parts that Nova said might be useful. He told people he was working on a hobby project, which wasn't entirely untrue. As Jake spent more time with the aliens, he learned about their home world. Thylia had been a beautiful planet with purple skies and silver oceans. But their sun was dying, slowly growing colder each year. Their people had been forced to search for new worlds where they could survive. Zara, Luna, and Nova were part of a small group of scouts sent to explore potentially habitable planets. Earth had seemed perfect, similar atmosphere, abundant water, and diverse life forms. But when they arrived, they discovered that Earth also had intelligent life, and they weren't sure if humans would welcome them. The crash had been caused by a malfunction in their ship's stealth system. They had been trying to observe human society without being detected when their ship suddenly became visible to human radar. Military jets had scrambled to investigate, forcing them to make an emergency landing. Jake assured them that not all humans were violent, but he understood their caution. He had seen enough news to know that first contact with aliens would probably cause panic and fear among many people. As the three aliens grew stronger and healthier under Jake's care, they began to talk about their future. Their ship repairs were progressing slowly, but Nova believed they might be able to leave Earth eventually. The question was whether they should return to their dying world or try to find another planet. Jake found himself hoping they would stay, but he knew the decision had to be theirs. He had grown attached to his alien friends and couldn't imagine going back to his old routine without them. One evening, as they sat together in the warm shed sharing a meal of Earth and Therian food, Zara asked Jake a question that surprised him. "Jake," she said in her musical voice, "what if more of our people came to Earth? Would humans accept us?" Jake thought carefully about his answer. He knew the truth was complicated, but he also believed in humanity's capacity for compassion. "Some would," he said honestly. "It would take time, and there would be fear at first, but I think most humans would want to help, especially if they knew you were peaceful." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "We have been watching humans for many months. We see much kindness like yours, but we also see violence and destruction. We're not perfect," Jake admitted, "but we're capable of learning and changing. The fact that you're here alive and safe proves that." That night, as Jake walked home, he realized that his simple act of feeding stray animals had led to something much bigger. He had become humanity's first ambassador to an alien species, and the responsibility both excited and terrified him. Jake's secret was becoming harder to keep. Dr. Patricia Kane had started asking questions about the missing medical supplies. She had noticed that bandages, antibiotics, and other items were disappearing from the clinic's inventory. "Jake, do you know anything about the missing supplies?" Dr. Kane asked one morning as they prepared for the day's appointments. "I've had to reorder antibiotics twice this month." Jake felt his face turn red. He had always been a terrible liar. "Maybe we're using more than usual?" he suggested weakly. "The stray animals have been getting more injuries lately." Dr. Kane looked at him suspiciously. "The stray animals? Jake, I know you have a soft heart, but you can't just take clinic supplies for strays. We need those medications for our paying patients." "I understand," Jake said quickly. "I'll be more careful about tracking what we use." But Jake knew he couldn't stop taking supplies. Nova's arm was healing, but she still needed antibiotics. Luna had developed a cough that worried him, and Zara had cuts on her hands from working on their ship repairs. The bigger problem was that government agents had arrived in town. Jake first noticed them at the diner where he ate lunch. Two people, in dark suits who didn't look like locals, asking questions about unusual sightings in the area. Jake's friend, Pete, who worked at the diner, told him what the agents were asking about. They wanted to know if anyone had seen strange lights in the woods or if any weird stuff had been found. They said they were from some kind of environmental agency, but they sure didn't look like tree huggers to me. Jake's stomach dropped. He knew they were looking for his alien friends. That evening, Jake warned Zara, Luna, and Nova about the agents. The three aliens became very agitated when they heard the news. They huddled together, making rapid musical sounds that Jake couldn't understand. "They find us, we must leave," Zara said, her voice filled with fear. "Ship not ready, but we must go." "Wait," Jake said. "Maybe they won't find you. The shed is hidden, and you've been careful." But Nova shook her head. "They have... how you say machines that find our energy. Ship still makes signals they can detect." Jake realized the situation was more serious than he had thought. If the government found the aliens, there was no telling what would happen to them. He had seen enough science fiction movies to know that first contact rarely went well for the aliens. Over the next few days, Jake noticed more agents in town. They were asking questions at the hardware store, the gas station, and even at the clinic. They showed people photos of unusual objects and asked if anyone had seen lights in the sky. Agent Coleman Wright, who seemed to be their leader, visited the animal clinic on a Thursday afternoon. He was a tall man with cold eyes who made Jake very nervous. "We're investigating some unusual energy readings in this area," Agent Wright told Dr. Kane. "Have you or your staff noticed anything strange lately? Unusual lights, unknown objects, anything out of the ordinary?" Dr. Kane shook her head. "No, nothing like that. This is a quiet town. The most exciting thing that happens here is when someone's cow gets loose." Agent Wright's eyes fixed on Jake. "What about you, Mr. Martinez? You work late sometimes, don't you? Have you seen anything unusual?" Jake's heart pounded, but he tried to stay calm. "No, sir, I just feed the stray animals and go home. Nothing unusual about that." "Stray animals?" Agent Wright made a note in his notebook. "Where exactly do you feed them?" "In the alley behind. The clinic," Jake said, hoping his voice didn't shake. "There are a lot of homeless cats and dogs around here." Agent Wright nodded and left, but Jake could tell he was suspicious. That night, Jake noticed a black SUV parked across the street from the clinic. Someone was watching. The crisis came 2 days later. Jake arrived at the clinic for his evening routine and found Nova collapsed on the floor of the shed. She was burning with fever and having trouble breathing. Zara and Luna were beside themselves with worry, making distressed musical sounds. "She is very sick," Zara explained. "Earth bacteria, very bad for us. We have medicine, but not enough." Jake examined Nova and realized she had developed a serious infection. Her alien immune system was struggling to fight off Earth germs, and she needed stronger antibiotics than what Jake had been able to provide. "I have to take her to the clinic," Jake said. "She needs proper medical equipment." "No," Luna said, speaking English for the first time since Jake had met her. "They find us, they take us away. If I don't help her, she's going to die," Jake said firmly. "I won't let that happen." It was the hardest decision Jake had ever made, but he knew Nova's life was more important than keeping their secret. After midnight, when the town was asleep, Jake carried Nova to the clinic. Zara and Luna came with him, too worried about their friend to stay behind. Using his keys, Jake got them into the clinic and turned on the lights in the back room. He put Nova on the examination table and started an IV drip with antibiotics. He used the clinic's X-ray machine to check her lungs and found signs of pneumonia. As Jake worked to save Nova's life, Zara and Luna watched in amazement. They had never seen human medical technology before, and they were impressed by the clinic's equipment. "Your people are healers," Zara said softly. "Like us, but different." "Some of us are," Jake replied as he monitored Nova's temperature. "Many humans dedicate their lives to helping others just like you do." While Nova's condition stabilized, under Jake's care, Zara and Luna told him more about their mission. They were not just refugees from a dying world. They were scientists sent to study Earth and determine if it could become a new home for their people. "Our leaders sent many ships to many worlds," Zara explained. "We are one small group. Our job is to learn about Earth life and Earth people." "What have you learned?" Jake asked. Luna spoke up, her voice still shy but determined. "We learned that Earth is a beautiful world with many kinds of life, but we also learned that Earth people are complicated." "How so?" "You can be very kind like you," Zara said, "but you can also be very violent. We watch your news signals, your entertainment. Much fighting, much destruction." Jake nodded sadly. "Yeah, we're not perfect. We have wars and problems, but we also have people who spend their whole lives trying to help others. People who feed stray animals every night even when nobody's watching." Zara smiled at that. "Yes, we see this too. That is why we stay to study more, even after ship crashes." As the night wore on, Nova's fever broke and her breathing became easier. The Earth antibiotics were working, and Jake felt relief wash over him. He had saved her life, but he had also exposed his friends to danger. We need to get you back to the shed before morning, Jake said. If Dr. Kane finds you here, there will be too many questions. But as they prepared to leave, Jake heard the sound of car doors slamming outside the clinic. Through the window, he saw several black SUVs surrounding the building. Bright spotlights lit up the parking lot. Agent Wright's voice came through a megaphone. "This is the FBI. We know you're in there. Come out slowly with your hands visible." Jake's heart sank. They had been found. The choice between saving Nova's life and protecting their secret had been made for him, but now all three aliens were in danger. Zara, Luna, and Nova looked at Jake with fear in their large eyes. They were trapped, and Jake knew that everything was about to change. The peaceful first contact he had hoped for was about to become something much more complicated and dangerous. "Whatever happens," Jake whispered to his alien friends, "remember that not all humans are the same. Some of us want to help." Outside, Agent Wright was losing patience. "You have 30 seconds to come out, or we're coming in." Jake took a deep breath and made another difficult decision. He would go out first and try to protect his friends no matter what the consequences. Jake held up his hands and walked slowly toward the clinic's front door. His heart was pounding, but he knew he had to protect Zara, Luna, and Nova. Behind him, he could hear the aliens making quiet, frightened sounds. "I'm coming out," Jake called, through the door. "I'm alone and unarmed." He opened the door and stepped into the bright lights. Agent Wright and 6 other agents had their weapons drawn, all pointed at him. Jake had never been so scared in his life. "Where are they?" Agent Wright demanded. "We know you're hiding them." "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake said, though his voice shook. Agent Wright nodded to 2 of his men who pushed past Jake into the clinic. Within seconds, Jake heard Zara's musical voice crying out in fear. The agents had found them. "Please don't hurt them," Jake said desperately. "They're not dangerous. They're just scared and lost." The agents emerged from the clinic, roughly escorting Zara, Luna, and Nova. The 3 aliens were holding hands, their large eyes wide with terror. Nova was still weak from her illness and could barely walk. "Step back, Martinez," Agent Wright ordered. "These beings are now in federal custody." "They're not criminals," Jake protested. "They're refugees. Their world is dying and they came here looking for help." Agent Wright ignored him and spoke into his radio. "Base, this is Wright. We have the subjects in custody. Requesting immediate transport to the facility." Jake watched in horror as the agents forced his alien friends toward the waiting vehicles. Zara looked back at him with tears in her glowing eyes. "Jake," she called out. "Thank you for kindness. Remember us." "Wait!" Jake shouted, running toward them. 2 agents grabbed him and held him back. "You can't just take them. They haven't done anything wrong." "They're illegal aliens, literally," Agent Wright said coldly. "They entered our airspace without permission and crashed on American soil. They're coming with us." As the agents loaded Zara, Luna, and Nova into separate vehicles, Jake felt helpless and angry. Everything he had worked for, all the trust he had built, was being destroyed by fear and suspicion. But then Jake remembered something Dr. Elena Rodriguez had told him when they were in veterinary school together. Elena had gone on to study biology and now worked for NASA. She had always talked about the possibility of life on other worlds and what it might mean for humanity. "Wait," Jake called out to Agent Wright. "Before you take them away, there's something you need to know. Nova was dying from Earth bacteria, but she's developing immunity. Their biology is adapting to our world." Agent Wright paused. "What are you talking about?" "They're not just refugees," Jake said, thinking quickly. "They're scientists. They've been studying Earth's biology and their bodies are learning to adapt to our environment. If you take them to some government lab and treat them like prisoners, you'll lose the greatest scientific opportunity in human history." "That's not your concern," Agent Wright replied, but Jake could see he was listening. "It should be everyone's concern," Jake said desperately. "These beings are peaceful. They're trying to save their species just like we would do if Earth was dying. They could teach us about their technology, their science, but only if we treat them with respect, not fear." Agent Wright considered this for a moment, then shook his head. Nice try, but I have my orders. Jake felt defeated as he watched the vehicles prepare to leave, but then he heard something that changed everything. The sound of more cars arriving. Dr. Kane was pulling into the parking lot, followed by several other vehicles. To Jake's amazement, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stepped out of one of the cars. She was older now, with gray streaks in her hair, but Jake recognized her immediately. "Elena," Jake called out. "What are you doing here?" "You called me, remember?" Elena said, walking toward him. "You said you had something important to show me about interspecies biology." Jake was confused for a moment, then realized what must have happened. In his panic about Nova's illness, he had mentioned Elena's name to the aliens. Somehow they had contacted her using their technology. "Dr. Rodriguez," Agent Wright said, recognizing her. "This is a classified operation. You need to leave immediately." "Actually, Agent Wright, I don't think I do," Elena replied calmly. She pulled out official-looking documents. "I have authorization from NASA and the Department of Science to observe any potential first contact situations. These beings fall under scientific jurisdiction, not just security." Jake watched in amazement as Elena approached the vehicles containing his alien friends. She spoke softly to the agents guarding them, and after a few minutes, they allowed her to see Zara, Luna, and Nova. Elena's face filled with wonder as she looked at the aliens. Jake could see her scientific mind working, taking in every detail of their appearance and behavior. "Agent Wright," Elena said after examining the aliens. "These beings are clearly intelligent and peaceful. Treating them as prisoners will only create fear and hostility. We need to approach this as a scientific opportunity, not a security threat. My orders are to secure the subjects and transport them to the facility," Agent Wright insisted. "And my authority supersedes your orders when it comes to scientific matters," Elena replied firmly. "I'm establishing a controlled first contact protocol. These beings will be studied and cared for at a neutral location with proper scientific oversight." Jake held his breath as Agent Wright considered Elena's words. The standoff continued for several tense minutes before Agent Wright finally spoke into his radio. "Base, this is Wright. We have a situation that requires higher authorization. Dr. Rodriguez from NASA is invoking scientific jurisdiction." While they waited for a response, Elena approached Jake. "Tell me everything," she said quietly. "How long have you known them? What have you learned?" Jake quickly explained everything that had happened, from first seeing the blue light to caring for the aliens over the past months. Elena listened intently, occasionally asking questions about their behavior and abilities. "You've done something remarkable, Jake," Elena said when he finished. "You've achieved peaceful first contact through patience and compassion. That's exactly how it should happen." Agent Wright's radio crackled with a response. After a brief conversation, he turned to Elena with obvious frustration. "You have temporary custody of the subjects, Dr. Rodriguez, but they remain under federal monitoring and any security concerns will result in immediate transfer to our facility." Elena nodded. "Understood. I'll establish a research station where they can be studied safely and comfortably." Over the following hours, Elena worked with Jake to communicate with Zara, Luna, and Nova. The aliens were still frightened, but they began to relax when they realized Elena was like Jake, someone who wanted to help rather than harm them. Through careful translation, Elena learned about the aliens' mission and their dying world. She was fascinated by their scientific knowledge and their peaceful culture. "This changes everything we know about life in the universe," Elena told Jake. "But more importantly, it proves that peaceful coexistence between species is possible." Within a week, Elena had established a small research facility disguised as an agricultural research station. Zara, Luna, and Nova were given comfortable quarters and the freedom to continue their work while sharing their knowledge with human scientists. Jake was appointed as the primary liaison between the species, a role that made perfect sense given his relationship with the aliens. His animal clinic became an unofficial meeting place where other scientists could interact with the Therians in a relaxed, non-threatening environment. The three aliens began sharing their agricultural technology, helping Earth scientists develop new ways to grow food in harsh conditions. In return, they learned about Earth's biodiversity and developed treatments that helped them adapt to their new world. Most importantly, they sent signals to other Therian ships, letting them know that Earth was a place where peaceful refugees could find sanctuary. Not all humans were ready for this knowledge, but enough were willing to help that hope remained alive. 6 months later, Jake continued his evening routine of feeding the stray animals behind the clinic. But now he was also joined by Zara, Luna, and Nova, who had grown to love Earth's animals as much as he did. As they worked together to care for the hungry strays, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed. His simple act of kindness had led to humanity's first peaceful contact with an alien species, proving that compassion could overcome fear and build bridges between worlds. "Jake," Zara said as they finished filling the food bowls, "our people sing songs of heroes who save worlds. You are such a hero." Jake smiled and shook his head. "I just fed some hungry animals and some hungry friends." But as Jake looked up at the stars that night, he knew that Zara was right. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change the universe. And sometimes, feeding stray animals could lead to saving 2 entire worlds.